guys. Just first of all wanted to say I do apologise for leaving you waiting all of this time to listen to this episode. I recorded this episode back in July in 2024, and it was a very busy time. I was going into Morocco, Portugal, Vietnam, back to Australia, and since I have settled in and sort of got my ducks in a row, and the podcast will be more regular moving forward. But this episode was really, really awesome, and I've just listened to it back, and I'm so happy with the conversation that we had. I remember feeling at the end of the podcast how grateful I was for the time, because what you have just had on this podcast is a deep dive into basically a 1 hour TED talk. Mike talks of his past experiences, talks about his journey, and it's remarkable. It's remarkable where he came from, what he's been through multiple times, and where he is now and where he is heading. And it's just such a cool testament that experiences in life don't have to break us. They can uplift us. They can allow us to move into spaces where we ultimately are doing something good for the world. And that is exactly what Mike is doing. So enjoy the episode, and it's awesome, and I know you're going to enjoy it. If you have any feedback, let me know. But welcome to the Just Another Moment podcast, and enjoy this episode. Hi guys, welcome to the Just Another Moment podcast. I'm so glad you're back, and today I have got a amazing guest, Mike Cameron, an executive coach, a keynote speaker, an author. He's got a mission. His mission is to create a community of emotionally connected leaders to inspire men to feel more, be more, and ultimately do more. Mike, thank you so much for being here. I am so excited that you're here today, and I cannot wait to get into this episode.
My pleasure, man. I'm glad to be here. It's been great to connect with you.
Yeah, amazing. And it's been about 6-8 weeks or so since we last connected, and we had an awesome chat that was meant to be half an hour, and we ended up doing a full podcast length conversation.
We did.
And you only gave me the short snippets of your life, which is absolutely mind blowing. So just a quick summary, and we can get into it. But you know, you had time in Australia at 16. You worked as a prawn trawler. You had a car accident, which then took you back to Canada. You do triathlons, Ironmans, ultras. When we spoke, you just finished a 100-mile race.
That's right.
Next year, you're doing a 200-mile race. Your story is absolutely incredible, and I think what we should do is start from the start, and we'll let it unravel from there and just see where we go. But there's so much to talk about today, from building resilience in the good times, that badassery that you talk about in your TED talk as well, being tough and tender. But yeah, let's go from the start. So I'm from Australia. My sister lives up in Cairns. You spent time in Cairns as a 16-year-old. Tell me how you got there.
Oh, you want to go back to the start? The start.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was so in my teen years, I was a bit of a shithead and kind of doing all the things that I probably shouldn't have been doing. And mom and dad didn't really know what to do with me at that time. And my uncle, my mom's brother, was an entrepreneur up in Cairns. He owned a fishing company, and Uncle John he's a bit of a guy that I looked up to. He was kind of the black sheep of the family. My mom was born in Taiwan, missionary's kid. Uncle John, her brother, got into a bit of trouble himself when he was young, got on a boat and jumped ship in Australia, made a life for himself, became a multimillionaire. Again, all of the things that I aspired to do. So when mom and dad didn't know what to do with me, they said, "Hey, how'd you like to go live with Uncle John for a while?" And I thought, oh, hell yeah, that'd be fantastic. And little did I know that it wasn't going to be quite the adventure that I thought it would be. They sent me down there to work. So as you can imagine, as a 16-year-old that thought he knew everything and not all that physically strong, getting shipped off to Australia to go work on the prawn trawlers for a while was a bit of an eye opener for me, and it was the game changer for me for sure. So yeah, that was kind of the start of things for me, and I ended up getting into, as you said, we got into a really bad car accident. I was in a coma for 4 days, almost died. Ultimately cut my trip short, so I was only down there for about 5 months. That was supposed to be a longer stretch, but yeah, got cut short. But really, that trip was the game changer for me. Like, I really learned the art of the work ethic and what it meant to work hard. And I responded when Uncle John would bust my back for 10 hours a day, but at the end of the day, he'd hand me a beer and say, good job. And I really responded to that. So yeah, that was absolutely a turning point for me in my life. And then sort of came back home to Canada and sort of fell back into the groove. And, at that point still thought I was invincible, and off I went.
Yeah. Awesome. And yeah, like hearing that about you, that being your game changer, work ethic, but also reward, right? It's being recognized for that hard work at the end of the day. And every day is going to be awful, it's going to suck, but you still get up and you do it. And I think what I've learned, I've just done my first ever consecutive running streak of 9 days, and that sucks. But what I tell myself is it's going to suck and I'm going to hate it, but I'm ultimately going to just get through it, and at the end of it I can rest and relax. And I think when you get tested in those hard work environments, and I think this is a result of you now being able to do ultra marathons, it's something that you go through the hard work to get the reward, and it is the journey as well. Now, you mentioned that you had a car accident, you're in a coma for 4 days, but you still returned to Canada and you still were invincible, like as you like to call it. But I remembered you saying as well, you got into personal development quite young, around 18, 19. So did having the car accident have any correlation to that journey into that space?
Yeah, you know what? That's a great question. I suspect it probably did. I think, I always had this vision of being this badass businessman, that I was going to be successful. And I knew at a very young age I was destined for greatness, so to speak. And so I really, again, I think seeing Uncle John, what he had done with his life, he'd done it very non-traditionally. He didn't follow sort of the regular path. He just went out and busted his ass and worked hard and made it for himself. And so, yeah, I think at that point I really started to dive into a lot of the motivational self-help stuff. I think I read Tony Robbins' book when I was 19. I walked on fire with Tony in Vancouver, British Columbia in 1994. So I was like 24 years old at that time. And yeah, it's been a constant journey ever since.
Yeah, no, that's amazing, and I'm smiling because you're walking on fire with Tony Robbins the year I was born, and and it's just amazing. And I just watched his Netflix, I Am Not Your Guru. I think that's the third or fourth time I've watched it, and there's so much you can take out of that, which is like awesome. But yeah, so for you to have that experience with him in Vancouver, like 30 years ago now, is epic. So tell me what inspires you to sort of do these triathlons, ultras, Ironman, stuff like that. Like, what's the drive behind you that puts you into that space? Because obviously it's one thing to be successful in business and it's one thing to be successful as an athlete, but then to combine the two together is something pretty remarkable as well. And yeah, what's your mindset behind that?
I think what I originally liked about doing sort of the endurance sport thing was this idea that, we know the formula very well. And if we follow the formula, we get stronger, we get faster, we can run longer. And it really isn't a question mark. Like we know the formula. It's very black and white. And so I really liked the idea of, if I have the discipline and the commitment to do the work that needs to be done, the result is inevitable. And having those goals at the end of the process, so whether it was, an Ironman, whether it's a half Ironman, whether it was a marathon, when I started, or really when I started, it was more like a 10K. But ultimately just progressing and looking at what is that next milestone, and understanding that, it's very demonstrable. You can see that here's the work that needs to be done, and here's the outcome that will result with that. Whereas business, we talk about that, but it's a little less black and white. There are a lot less things in your control in business, so there's a lot more variables. So I really liked the physical discipline of getting up every morning, getting my shoes on, getting out the door, and doing the work, and knowing that ultimately, if I do the work, the results will come.
Yeah, that's amazing. And do you find that translate back into your business, like that consistency and discipline with your physical work to be able to do an ultra? Like 100 miles is absolutely insane to me. And then you said, I'm doing 200 next year, and that's going to be 322 kilometers. I'm just like, that gives me mad anxiety. But yeah, so like that discipline and consistency into business.
Yeah, there's no question. And again, with business, I think the result is a little less certain, although with ultra marathons, the result is never certain because anything can happen on the day. But it really does come down to committing to that process and having the discipline to get up every single day, follow the process, do the work, even when you don't want to. Like you said, that your 9-day running streak. I'm sure there's days when you wake up and you don't want to go for a run, but ultimately this is the objective that I've set out. If I want to get to that end result, I may not have 100% control over the end result, but I do have 100% control how I show up, how I execute on the process of getting there. And yeah, for me, the translation of the discipline is absolute. Like it's there's no question it translates.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. I just can't even fathom the amount of work that goes into something like that. So yeah, that's really awesome. Now, I mentioned at the start as well that you have a mission, and that's to create a community of emotionally connected leaders who inspire men to feel more, be more, and ultimately do more. Where does that come from? Like, what's your driving motivation behind that?
Yeah, and I think, this is really sort of the crux of my story. In 2015, well, so to back up, part of why I started endurance sport was 2012. I split up with my wife, and long distance runs, workouts, that really became my refuge. That was my sort of mental health space, and just finding some peace in a time that was pretty chaotic in my life. And so that was really where that journey began. And then in 2015, I'd spent 3 years after separation just really getting grounded, getting in touch with self. And in 2015, I met an incredible woman. She was a yogi, a potter, a painter, a photographer, a videographer, just an incredible artist and an incredible human being. And we really explored a lot of sort of the philosophy of life. Like, we would listen to podcasts together, we would take notes, we would compare notes. And really, we had both spent a lot of time doing the work together. And it was really incredible for me, just, again, to learn from somebody, to see the world through the eyes of an artist was something that I had never done. I would have told you that I did not have a creative bone in my body. And she really helped me to see that that wasn't true. You know, I'd created businesses, I'd created nonprofits, I created a runner. You know, I can't sit down and draw, but to think that I wasn't creative was just absolutely wrong. And she really helped me see the world through the eyes of an artist and just become much more present to what was going on in the world. And it was just, it was an incredible sort of inflection point in my life. I think we had come together at the right time for both of us. We'd both done a lot of sort of the inner work, and then we continued that together. And then it was October 2nd of 2015. Colleen had spent the night at my place. And as I said, she was a yogi, so she often taught yoga early in the morning. And that Friday morning, she had to teach at 6 o'clock in the morning. So alarm went off at 5 o'clock. She got up, got dressed, came around to my side of the bed, gave me a kiss, said goodbye. I said, have fun at yoga. And I rolled over and went back to sleep. And eventually my alarm goes off at 7 o'clock. I get up, go downstairs, making breakfast, shot her a text as was our custom. And I said, hey, how was yoga? To which I got no response. And I thought, you know, not a big deal. She wasn't a huge talker, but she was an incredible listener. And as a result, would often get sucked into long, drawn out conversations with her students. So I didn't hear from her for a while. And yeah, as I'm packing up to go out to my first appointment, I thought, oh, this is a little bit odd. So I sent her another text and I just said, hello, to which I got no response. Hopped in the car, driving downtown. I picked up the phone, called her. The phone rang and rang and rang and rang. Eventually went to voicemail. And, you know, now I'm starting to get this feeling and, you know, the story is spinning in my head. Okay, did I do something wrong? Did I piss her off last night? Like, are we on the outs? And I just thought, no, that's ridiculous. We had an incredible night last night. So I went into my meeting, 9 o'clock, came back out, 10 o'clock, still no word. Sent her another note, said, hey, I'm starting to get a little bit worried about you. Where are you at? Had another meeting, ended up going with some clients for lunch. And at that point, you know, my heart was just in my chest and my stomach was doing flip-flops. You know, that feeling you get when just something is not feeling quite right. And I'm doing my best to put on my happy face for the clients that I was taking out for lunch. And as we walked into the restaurant, my phone rang and I looked at it and it was a blocked number. So I answered it and the voice on the other end of the line said, is this Mike Cameron? And I said, yes. And he said, this is Constable so-and-so. And my heart just sank and I don't remember his name. And I practically yelled into the phone. I said, is she okay? He says, where are you? I said, is she okay? He says, where are you? We're at your house. We're coming to you. So I turned and I told him where I was. I turned, walked out of the restaurant, and I stood at the side of the curb for what felt like forever, but was probably 5 or 6 minutes. My house wasn't very far from where we were. And this unmarked police car pulls up across the street from me, and I start walking across the street, and the cop meets me in the middle of the road. And again, my mind is just racing. My heart is in my chest. And he meets me in the middle of the road, and after identifying who I was, he said 3 words to me that would change my life forever. He simply looked me in the eye and he said, Colleen is dead. She had been shot and killed by an ex-boyfriend who subsequently took his own life. And, you know, at that moment, my world just unraveled. I remember sitting in the back of that cop car just thinking, this can't be real, this can't be real, this can't be real. And ultimately realizing that, you know what, this is probably the most real thing that was ever going to happen to me. And I had lots of folks at that time that wanted me to go after the justice system, which had certainly let her down. You know, she'd done all the things, she'd filed the restraining order. We knew this guy was a problem. She'd filed the breaches of the restraining order. The cops hadn't done anything about it. But at that time, I just thought, you know, asking the question, how do we build a better restraining order, is probably the wrong question. And maybe the better question to be asking is how do we prevent men from getting to that point in the first place? And when I looked at sort of my history, the skills that I had, I've been speaking professionally for 20 some odd years at that time, always in the realm of sales and leadership, but always talking about the impact that emotion had on human behavior. And, when I started, it was about, you want to sell more widgets, you make that emotional connection with your customer, people buy on emotions and justify it with logic. As a business leader, as I moved into and around my own business, I started to recognize that my team's performance was directly impacted by how well they emotionally bought into our mission, our vision, our values as an organization. And so I really focused on teaching that from the stage, so to speak. And when I looked at what had happened to Colleen, this was a man that made a decision with very permanent consequences based on a very temporary emotion. And as men, we're not typically very good at exploring our emotions. And if we don't understand the underlying emotions that drive those decisions that we make, we're fucked. We're screwed. We have zero chance of living a purposeful and rich life. So that's where that mission was born. When I looked at, should I chase the justice system? What can I do about this? How can I turn this pain into purpose? What can I do? What are the lessons that I can learn? What is the wisdom that I can impart? What are the skills that I have as a human being that can be brought to bear and actually impact this world in a positive way? And like I said, when I really looked at it, again, the reason I get fired up, the reason I'm passionate about teaching men the art of emotional reconnection is because emotionally connected men don't fucking kill people. Emotionally connected men don't take their own lives. Emotionally connected men make better leaders, they make better fathers, they make better partners, they live richer lives, and they make better human beings. So for me, I am committed to empowering a community of emotionally connected leaders that will allow men to feel more so that they can be more and ultimately do more. And so that's the long version of where that came from.
Yeah. And that's a incredible story. And yeah, I can't imagine how difficult that would have been at that time. And I just want to ask as well, like in that moment, like what were the feelings that came up for you? Because there's a whole range, when you go through a grieving process, there's anger, there's sadness, there's a whole range of different emotions. What was it for you, and how did you handle that at the time?
Yeah, well, let me give you a little context, what sort of shaped how I navigated that. I had a friend of mine sent me a letter. It's called A Letter to Rachel, written by a fellow by the name of Ram Dass. And Ram Dass was an American spiritual leader from the 70s. He wrote the book Be Here Now. This letter it's called A Letter to Rachel. Rachel was a young girl who had been murdered. This letter he wrote to her parents. And it was a friend of mine sent me this letter the day after Colleen had been murdered. And he said, I don't know if this will help you, but I've read this dozens of times and I always take comfort in these words. And I would highly encourage your listeners to go Google Ram Dass Letter to Rachel. It's like 5 paragraphs, but there were 3 keys out of that letter that really resonated for me. And the first was, he said, is anyone strong enough to remain conscious through such teachings as you're receiving? Probably very few. And again, he had written this to the parents of a girl who had been murdered. Is anyone strong enough to remain conscious through such teachings as you were receiving? And when I read that, I just knew that I had to remain conscious through this experience. I could have dove into a bottle. I could have turned to drugs. I could have gone. I was already a very accomplished workaholic. I could have jumped back into work. I could have gone a number of different directions. But when I read that, I knew that I had to remain conscious. I could not numb myself to the feelings that I was having, as difficult and as painful as they were. The second piece that he talked about, he said, our rational minds will never understand, but our hearts, if we keep them open, will find their own intuitive way. And again, it's that, I could have got stuck in that spiral of saying, why me, why her, why now? But there is no rational answer for that. And then the third and maybe most powerful piece is, now is the time to let your grief find expression. No false strength. And that one to me really landed, as men, and I had so many folks, put their arms around me and be strong, Mike, be strong. And while I love them for their intention, it saddens me that our Western culture's version of strength is to bury, to suppress, to avoid, to remain stoic in the face of our emotions. And so when I read that letter, I knew that I had an obligation to remain conscious, to not numb. So I allowed myself to feel. And as you said, there was a wide range of emotions. Like, it felt shitty, but what is shitty comprised of? There was anger. There was a lot of anger. There was sadness. There was shame. There was guilt. There was, all these things. I could have gone to yoga with her that morning. Why didn't I go to yoga with her that morning? Maybe I could have prevented this from happening. Or maybe there'd be 3 bodies on that driveway. I don't often think about that one. But, there was just such a wide range of emotions that came up. But the key for me was just allowing them to come. And when I needed to just collapse and sob, I would do that. When I needed to rage against my steering wheel as I was driving down the highway and beat the crap out of it, I would do that. I found a lot of comfort in writing. I found a lot of comfort in sharing her story. I had a speaking engagement booked the week after she was killed. And of course, the organizers reached out and said, would you like to cancel? We would completely understand. And I said, no, in fact, that's not at all what I want to do. But what I ended up doing was I rewrote my presentation completely, and I incorporated her into it. Because again, I talk about the impact that emotion has. And when I could share her story and some of the beauty that she brought my life and the beauty that she brought into this world, it was, twofold. It was so cathartic for me, and it was so powerful for the audience at that time. It was just so raw and so real and just really resonated. So I think that kind of answers your question.
I literally have goosebumps. It's the way you speak about her and the experience and how open you are as well, because you're exactly right. There's a reason why in Western culture 75% of all suicides are men. Those statistics don't change. UK, Canada, US, Australia, it's all in that bracket. And we're in Suicide Awareness Prevention Month at the moment. And, for me, that's something that pops up because I've had suicide ideation and I lived with depression and so on. And the way that I've sort of helped myself or dealt with things is actually by opening up and speaking. And it started with therapy from a young age. And then it's become more frequent with actually community, speaking, opening up with community. And this is one thing that you do, is you have your bi-weekly men's groups where you can start to empower these men to actually open up and become more connected with their emotions. And so what's the with that, what's the sort of take from men? Because men generally don't open up, they don't speak up, and they don't know really how to approach that. And there's a book that I just bought recently, I'm going to read it this month, but it's How to Listen So Men Will Talk, because it's something that yeah, it's something that men just don't know how to open up. So what's your approach in these men's groups that gives space and comfort and that safety for people to open up and talk about their struggles?
Yeah, and I think you nailed it. It's about creating the spaces for men to do that. I think there's a misconception. You hit the nail on the head. Men don't know how to. It's hard for men to. But there's this misconception that men don't want to. And I think that's bullshit, because if you create the space, you can't shut us up. So I use the acronym SOAR, SOAR. And that's just, the S is slow down. So just practice that pause. Again, as a business leader, that was one of my shortcomings, is I would make myself so busy and I'd be moving so fast that I just couldn't see anything around me. I didn't have time to feel. I also didn't have time for my wife. I didn't, again, it cost me a lot. So just learning to slow down. So that's the first piece. The O is open up and observe. And the open up for me, again, is twofold. One, open up to yourself. Just allow those feelings to come up. And the second piece of that open up is share with others. Do what we're doing right now. Have a conversation. Be real, be raw, be vulnerable. And the A is acceptance. Accept what's coming up. Let's not attach any judgment to the feelings. I shouldn't feel this way. Who am I to feel this way? I've got all the things. Just accept that this is what you're feeling. Doesn't matter why. And then that R is reconnect. And that's that reconnect with that emotional part of self, that deepest part of self. And again, as guys, we tend to sort of amputate the emotional parts of ourself. And you can't numb one piece without numbing everything. So you can't numb pain and still have joy. When we numb, we do it universally, and then we just flatline. So how do I create the space? We use the acronym SOAR. So we'll open our group typically with a 5 to 10 minute meditation, and we'll just slow down, take a breath, practice that pause. And I just walk the guys through a little bit of slow down. Sometimes I'll do it live. Sometimes I'll use a recording. And then we go around the room. We're virtual, so we go around the virtual room and we just observe. So 60 seconds, notice what you're feeling physically and articulate it. So jaws a little bit tight, eyes are kind of dry, shoulders are tight, noticing my feet connecting with the floor. Because as guys, we can typically notice what's going on physically. That's a much easier starting point for us. There's some tightness in my chest. And then we move that to emotionally. What are you noticing? There's a little bit of anxiety, a lot of gratitude. I'm here and I'm in. And that's how we sort of wrap up that first round. But it just creates that space to just observe without judgment and articulate as best you can. No story, no context. And that's, again, most of us aren't great at that. If I tell you my legs are sore, well, my legs are sore because I just did 7 days of back-to-back half marathons and we ran up a mountain yesterday, so my legs are sore. It's not about the story. Just notice that my quads are sore. And then, we move into that emotional piece. And then usually what I will do is, if I'm leading, and we co-lead these things, so if somebody else wants to take a turn, they're more than welcome to. But we'll introduce some type of theme for the night. So, that could be anything. It might be some world event, something that's been going on. It might be, we might talk about fatherhood. We might talk about gratitude. We might talk about who knows what. But the guys always know, if you got shit that's going on in your life that you need to unpack, you don't have to stick to the theme. You're welcome to just puke it all out. But the real magic is, it's about getting it out of your head and into your heart. And the more the guys show up, the more regulars start to understand this. And again, it's not about fixing each other. So it's not about providing advice. It's about sharing experiences. So, if you tell me something, I can resonate with, we do this little thump on the chest just to acknowledge that that resonates with me. And I'm not going to give you advice on how to fix the thing, but I might share an experience. I've run into the same thing, and this is what it did to me, and this is how I felt when I did that. And then I might ask you something that's going to take you out of here and bring you down here. So what was that feeling? I appreciated the way you did that with me earlier. What was the feeling that came up? Yeah, well, when she was killed, this is what happened. Okay, well, that's the story, but what's the feeling? And again, as the group starts to coalesce, and we've been together for a number of years, we've got a core group of guys. There's a few guys that, come and go. But we start to understand the questions to ask, when to poke a guy to go a little bit deeper, and when to let him off the hook. But all the guys know that it's a safe space, it's confidential. We're not about judging, we're just about sharing experience. And as soon as one guy opens up, so as soon as you open up, as soon as one of the guys opens up, everybody else around, you can see the light bulb turn on. It's like, holy shit, I thought I was the only one. Like, you too, man? Holy crow. And, that's when the floodgates start to open, and guys will really open up. And sometimes, guys will come and they'll just listen. And that's fine too. And there's a real power in just hearing other men's experiences. Mm-hmm. But there's this magic that happens when men come together with intention. It's not to shoot the shit about the hockey game or, what have you. We're there to go deep and have some real conversations and share our struggles. And not only our struggles, but share our victories. I might share, my son's in university and he's doing incredibly well. So I might share how proud I am of what he's up to. So there's times for both sides of the equation. It's not just about sharing our struggles. We also share our triumphs as well.
Yeah. And I think it's so important. And, that's at the core of my business as well, which is dream, share, inspire. I believe everyone's got a story to share. And if you can share that story, you might inspire someone else,
I get a challenge on that. I don't even think it's a might. I think if you share that story, you will inspire somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you would speak to 100 people, and this is what this podcast is about. If you can speak to an audience of 100 people, if it falls on deaf ears for 99, but there's that one person in that audience which goes, man, that story was so good and like so inspired by that, then that's what it's about. Is I believe in order to help the population, in order to help the world, it starts with one. And for me, my journey started with a couple of moments of inspiration, and from different people. So these different people have touched me, and now I'm sharing, and now I get to speak to you. And like I've learned so much from you, and have been inspired by your story as well. Because I think it's okay to not be okay is the message, right? Like it's okay to feel. And what I really loved is actually the slow down. I rushed through that. I still do.
So from a pragmatic standpoint, one of the things that I do, and I smile because my partner now, Michelle, we've been together 7 years now, and when we first met, she was very busy of mind and was loath to slow down. So one of the things that I did just as an exercise for the both of us, and I do it for myself as well, if we were going out on a date, let's say we had a 7 o'clock reservation, we'd pull up to the restaurant at 7 o'clock, and she'd go to get out, and I'd say, hang on a sec. And I'd open up my phone, I'd put 1 minute on the timer. I said, we're going to sit here for 1 minute. And we're just going to sit in silence. We're just going to sit here. She's like, we have a reservation at 7 o'clock. It's like, yeah, that's okay. They're not going to give away our reservation in 60 seconds. Taking 60 seconds to pause isn't going to kill you, but it literally could save your life. So, again, that first go round, I think we got 15 seconds in, and you could see she's starting to shake, smoke's coming out of her ears. and it was a stretch. But eventually we got to that 60 seconds. So that would be a challenge I would put out for your listeners, is the next time you're driving somewhere, when you get to your destination, just throw 60 seconds on your phone and just sit there quietly for 60 seconds and let that timer just count down. Take a breath, take that pause, and practice that throughout the day. So yeah, it's incredibly powerful. You know, Viktor Frankl talks about between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space is our power to choose, and in our choice is our freedom and our growth. And when we can extend that space, when we can practice that this pause, we can become much more intentional about our responses. We can become responsive rather than reactive. And it's such a powerful thing. You know, when people ask me, what's the one thing you want people to know? That's it. Practice that pause. That is probably the number one skill that you could gain. It seems simple, but it is so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like in a world which moves so quickly, you know, I go to London every Wednesday now, and I just look and man, it's always moving, always something happening, and it's like, who is stopping? And like the funny thing is I host mindful walks in London. So the point of that is to go and slow down and actually just walk and experience the river and the way the sun is shining on it and the trees and all of that. And it's such a cool experience because you're just connecting. You're connecting with nature and you're connecting with other people and you're sharing that story. And to actually slow down is, I only do it when I'm in nature, you know, so I need to translate from nature back into my everyday life as well. But yeah, I find it so fascinating that it's something so simple can be so powerful.
Yeah,
And that,
it is. It's sometimes a little hard to wrap your head around because I don't know. For me, I wanted something more complicated, more complex that I could work on and figure out. But it's not. I mean, it's simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. And I love what you talked about being out in nature and just slowing down. And those were the things that Colleen really taught me, is just to be present, to observe, and to notice. That was also one of the things, I'm going to choke up as I think about this. After she was gone, I went out, I took myself out for dinner, and I went out to a fairly fancy restaurant and just decided I was going to have a nice dinner and I was just going to be present with the environment. And I remember just noticing every little thing, every nuance of that restaurant, the way that she would. Again, she saw the world through the eyes of an artist. And I love to write. So that was for me, that's what worked. I would start thinking about, if I had to write a book about this 60-minute experience, what would I capture? You know, the definition in the ceiling, the artwork on the walls, the party of 15 that were clearly a corporate Christmas party, the one lady that was wearing a dress that was too small that she was kind of spilling out of, and she'd had too much to drink and was tripping on her heels. And, you know, again, all of these little things. The couple next to me at the table that were clearly either on a very early on in their life, or they had an incredibly powerful relationship because they couldn't stop touching each other, right? But just noticing all of those things, it's such a powerful practice.
Yeah, you just reminded me of the best piece of advice when I got married was to stop and have a look around, because before you know it, the day is gone and you won't remember any of it. And the crazy thing is, I remember some of it. The things I remember most is when I stopped. I stopped and I looked, you know, and those memories are like really important. And I love what you said at the start as well, where you said, I was smiling as well because I'm exactly like you, not creative, not an artist, wouldn't know how to draw to save my life. But the same mind, where I go, I'm not a creative person, which is not true, because how creative do you have to be to set up your own business, to have that vision and to run with it, and also to have the confidence behind it? You need to be creative enough to believe that it's something that's possible. And that is pure creativity from the business sense. And yeah, I'm the same as you. So you mentioned that Colleen said that, or like helped you see the world through the eyes of an artist. And is that where like the slowing down and becoming more in touch with like seeing things and the way things feel? Because that's like in the mental health space, or like to reduce anxiety, there's that 5 4 3 2 1
Yes.
grounding technique. And I wonder if that's something that you received from that, from Colleen.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, the beautiful thing was that, I had started practicing some of this on my own. She was a little further down the road than I was when we met. And so she just really expanded everything. For me, I think the first practice I started, that I would call my practice of presence, was at the grocery store and just noticing the clerk's name and calling them by name. So thank you, Sally. Thank you, George, just for ringing through my groceries. And those were the little things. But yes, absolutely, that grounding piece and just becoming present. What do you see, hear, feel, touch, smell? All of those pieces, and just really becoming present to everything. And it's such a powerful practice. And you're right, especially when it comes to anxiety, struggling with attention deficit. Just that practice of being present. And that's, for me, I do ice climbing, I do rock climbing, I do loads of trail running. And that's part of it too. Trail running for me is just the pinnacle of that practice of being present. When you're running through technical trails, you really have to be paying attention to where your footing's going, where you're at. Did I miss a turn? Am I on the right trail? All of that. So my mind is nowhere but right here, right now.
I think that's so on point. It's when I'm skiing, it's the similar thing. I'm skiing and I'm feeling. I could probably ski with my eyes shut, as long as I can feel, and as long as I know there's no trees or rocks in the way. But you have to use the feel and the flow, and like that's the most present I ever am is when I'm camping or I'm skiing. And I've just finished a book, The Courage to Be Disliked, which talks about there's no past, the past doesn't exist, and there's no future, the future doesn't exist. The only thing that is now. And obviously you're going to have memories from the past, but you can't change the past, you can't influence it. And I was doing a trauma course recently as well around certain events and so on, and much of the past is like false memories, in a sense that what you remember is distorted. So you can never fully be completely accurate on what exactly those events were, because your feelings and your perceptions were yours at that time, but someone else at that time might have something completely different. And so the power of now, or just living in that exact moment right now, is awesome. And so when you are trail running and you're in that space, I think it's something that really helps reconnect, and that's what I'm trying to deliver with a lot of the tours that we do. It's not about doing a tour, it's about actually noticing the things out there, which is awesome. Now, just before I wrap up today, I wanted to touch on tough and tender badassery.
Yes.
Because you mentioned this in your TED talk, and we talked a little bit about it. And I'm a big fan of Dr. Brené Brown as well, and I want to just get a little bit of insight from you around that, because one of the biggest things I think for men is actually being courageous enough to be vulnerable, to say that I'm not okay. I love that correlation between courage and vulnerability, because it's so true. Without vulnerability, you will never be courageous, but without being courageous, you can't be vulnerable. And yeah, I want to see what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, well, you're bang on. I mean, I think far too often, you know, the way men think about strong is misguided. You know, again, it's this thought that we have to bury, suppress, avoid these tough emotions. But as you said, the real courage comes when we can actually drop the armor, drop the masks, look in that mirror and say, who am I really? What's really coming up for me? And, you know, in my TED talk, I share the story of my Aunt Sharon, who's 65 years old, running a 5K race and starting at the back of the pack, and just having the courage to actually run a race that she knew full well she was going to be dead last. And as she told us that story, so that was Colleen and I had gone, I was doing a triathlon in Penticton at that time. And when she shared that story, it really hit me. And I thought, you know, it's not so much being badass enough to do an Ironman, knowing that I'm going to be middle of the pack. Like, nobody's going to care. Nobody's going to know. But having the courage to go out and do something like that, where you know you're going to be full well, you're going to be dead last. And there's going to be lots of people that are going to recognize that. So that, to me, is that combination of tough and tender. And bringing those two together, you know, it was that drive home from Penticton where I heard Brene Brown talk about that perfect equation for badassery is that exact combination of tough and tender. And that, you know, being tender doesn't mean you're not tough. And in fact, quite the opposite. As you said, it takes much more courage to be tender-hearted than it does to be a dick. And be angry. And it's so much more fulfilling when you can open up that tender side of yourself. And, you know, all of us are going to have varying degrees of that. You know, when I talk about connection, you know, that's the theme that I really focus on, and that's what's been going through my head as you speak. You know, you talked about connected to nature, you talked about connected to others, you talked about community. I talk about connection to self, connection to others, and connection to community, and understanding that it's on a continuum. You know, on one side, complete isolation, on the other side, fully connected to self, to others, and community. And while I hope that most of us aren't so emotionally disconnected, like Paul Jacob was, that they would take somebody else's life and their own, I know that all of us are not fully connected to self, others, and community. We've all got some room to move on that spectrum. And just like fitness, that connection piece is a point in time measure. And there's been times in my life where I've been incredibly fit. There's been times in my life where I've been incredibly unfit. All I know is, again, like fitness, that connection piece requires maintenance. It requires ongoing work. And I can always move up that continuum. I can always become more connected. And so it really starts with that awareness piece. So that's actually one of the things that I put together on my website was a connection self-assessment that just asks a number of reflection questions to look at, okay, how connected to self am I? How connected to others? And how connected to my community am I? And really sort of bringing that all together. So that combination of tough and tender, absolutely. Having the courage to connect with self, to connect with others, to connect with your community, to drop the mask, drop the armor. And especially for us guys, like, holy shit, is that ever liberating? When you can take that armor off, and this is what I get all the time when I talk to the guys I work with, you know, so how does that feel afterwards? Oh my God, dude, I feel light. It's like, yeah, that's just because you shed 30 pounds of armor that you carry around. And oftentimes when I ask guys, when do you drop that armor? You know, for some guys, for me, it's, you know, I'm out in the trail. For some guys, it's when I'm playing guitar. You know, I had one guy, we were talking about that just recently. For him, it was his guitar. When he picks up his guitar, the armor just falls off and he plays his guitar. And I said, well, what happens when you put that guitar back down? He thought about it for a minute. He says, yeah, I put that armor back on and I walk out the door.
Hmm.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if you could just leave that armor in the closet? You know, maybe there's times where you need to pull it out, but how much lighter would life be
Yeah,
when you could just leave that armor in the closet? Because the bulk of the time you don't need it.
absolutely. You're spot on. It's so many people walk around every day with a mask, and you have that identity crisis, or can't think of the word, but it's the imposter syndrome, right?
Yes.
And you sort of need it in certain aspects. You know, you're not going to be the same person at home as you are going to be at the office, because you have to be professional at the office, whereas at home you can be more yourself, you can be more fun and jovial, if that's in your character. And you're different with your parents, you're different with your grandparents, you're different with your partner, you're different with your kids, you're different at work, you're different at a social setting. um, but releasing that armor, or letting go of that, and allowing yourself to be true and authentic in as many circumstances as possible, I believe is the most important thing. If
Well,
you can't have fun because you're trying to be who you think other people think you should be, then you're just living in a perception of a perception. And I think it's important to just get to a point where everyone can be themselves, but it's easier said than done.
well, and you're right. So the question then becomes, what is self? So which parts of me are actually me? Which parts are a mask? Which parts are armor? What is this part protecting me from? And do I still need it? Because maybe I had this part when I was a child because I needed it. I had no other mechanism. I had no other coping skills. But maybe I can start to let that go and just find that true self. Because I don't think you do need to be different at home, at work, with grandma, with others. I think your behaviors are going to adjust slightly, for
Mm.
sure. You know, I mean, I might run around with a squirt gun at home and shoot my partner just to be a goofball. And I mean, frankly, I probably would have done that when I ran the business, because that was the kind of we did too. We had pajama day at work some days, and we did lots of goofy things. But you know, I again, the trick is really finding that self, and what is that true part of me, or not even part of me. What is that core of who I am, and what are the parts that surround me? And do I need those parts? Are they serving me, or are they just protection mechanisms that I don't need anymore?
Mm. I think that's definitely one of the hard things to discover, right? For a lot of people, is trying to. I'm certainly still on that journey, trying to understand what parts are there for me to protect me, and what parts are just me. And I think I've uncovered a lot of that. But I think you're always learning.
Yeah, no question, no question. I continue to try and excavate, and you know, again, using the onion analogy, it's just peeling back those layers.
Mm.
And there's a lifetime of layers, so you may never get through them all.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that's the fun part, right? It's about enjoying that journey. And for me, that you asked about, why do I do the ultras, the long distance stuff, is because that helps me peel back a layer. Who am I really? What can I really accomplish? And then there's the question, do I need this? This balance of striving and worthiness is real. Like, oh, I'll be worthy of calling myself a runner when I can run 100 miles. Okay, well, I've done that. Well, now what? Well, maybe when I run 200 miles, then it'll be enough, right? You know, it used to be 10K, and then it was a half marathon, then it was a marathon, and then it was a 50K, then a 50 miler, then a 100 miler, now it's a 200 miler. It's okay, man, Mike, when is enough enough? And really looking at, why am I doing this? Am I doing this because I'm trying to prove some type of worthiness? Or am I doing this to peel back a layer and just see how deep I can go? And I believe for me it's the latter. But it's the question I ask, because am I just running 200 miles because I've got something to prove to the world? I don't think so, but maybe.
Yeah. It's always a tricky one to ask, eh?
It
And
is.
then answer as well. I'll finish up on your book as well, because I want to just have a little understanding of this and give the opportunity to promote a couple of things you do. So you've got your book, bi-weekly men's group that we've discussed. You also do one-on-one coaching as a executive coach, and you also have a mastermind coming out soon, I believe, as
Correct.
well. So yeah, tell me about your book, Becoming a Better Man, when something when something's
When
got
something's
to
got to
change,
change, maybe
maybe
it's
it's
you.
you. Yeah.
Yes. So I'll give you the quick version of the subtitle. Um, for me, that was, people would surround me and again put their hand on my shoulder and they'd shake their head and they say, something's got to change, man, something's got to change. And that really became my mantra for a while. And I'd look in that mirror and I'd say, fuck, something's got to change, man, something's got to change. And then when it was the day I added those 3 words, everything shifted. I'd look in that mirror, I'd say, something's got to change, man. You know what? Maybe it's you, Mike. Maybe it's you that's got to change. And so that's where that subtitle came from. But yeah, the book is really just a chronology of my story. So from that, being a shitty teenager to getting shipped off to Australia. When I was in my 20s, I worked for a finance company. Turned out largest Ponzi scheme in big mortgage fraud. I lost millions of dollars. And then, went on to found my own business, then Colleen's story. So it's really just all of the big pivotal moments in my life and the lessons that I've learned along the way. So it's a pretty easy read. It's not really a how-to. It's just, this has been my journey and this is what I've learned, and maybe you can take a lesson or two from it as well.
I love that. I love that. And if you were to share one of the, like, a lesson, like, how would you say to be a better man?
Well, that self-reflection piece is huge. So, one of the big quotes I'm a fan of is, with awareness comes choice. And so often we run through the world on autopilot. We're just blind. And that means we don't have choice. When we don't know what's coming up, we don't have any choice. So part of becoming a better man is having the courage to drop those masks, having the courage to drop the armor, and just really look in the mirror. The bravest thing you can do is stand naked in front of that mirror and just say, who am I really? And get real and raw.
Yeah, love it. That's absolutely amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining today. It's been an absolute pleasure. We could talk for hours and hours, so maybe we'll do another episode one day. But all I can say is huge appreciation for you, for sharing your time, for sharing your story, your lessons, and your journey. It's I mean, what a life you've had, and you're not stopping, and you've got direction, and you want to help as many men as possible just be able to feel more, be more, and ultimately do more. So Mike, thank you so much, really appreciate it. And is there anything that you want to end with? If you want to share your socials, your website, anything like that, feel free.
Yeah, I mean, my website is mikecameron.ca. My email is just mike@mikecameron.ca. I love to connect, so if anybody wants to reach out, I'm always willing to have a conversation. But thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to share my story, because it's our stories that connect us, and
Yeah.
the more we can connect as a people, as a world, the better off we're going to be.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you again so much. Hugely appreciative, and it's been an absolute pleasure having you here. And yeah, cannot wait until everyone gets to listen to this, because I am absolutely buzzing. So thank you so much.
Thanks, brother.